In this section, we're going to talk about what is ISO. So ISO basically is the sensitivity of light hitting the sensor, the camera sensor. The rule of thumb here is you want to use a low ISO value. So to get a low ISO value, you need a lot more light, whether it's outside or false lights inside a room with lamps and what have you. Because if you go very high with the ISOs, you get a lot of grain and image in your footage. So let's jump into it and see what ISO is. Shutter speed and aperture control the physical amount of the light hitting the sensor. On phone cameras, normally there is not any physical moving parts for the aperture, so the aperture is fixed. We can see here there's some results of some camera apertures. ISO controls the amount of light the sensor needs and is a digital gain for the sensor. As the ISO increases, the amount of shutter light it needs decreases. For example, changing the ISO from 400 to 800 results in the camera needing half as much light to get the same exposure. This is why indoor photographers pump up their ISO values in low light, especially at low-lit sporting events or shooting wildlife, where trying to capture fast-moving action, they need a fast shutter. This in turn will lower the amount of light hitting the camera sensor, so in turn they increase the ISO value. Some mirrorless and DSLR cameras can have a high ISO value without causing too much image grain. Phone camera sensors, on the other hand, are much smaller than mirrorless cameras, and usually they have a fixed aperture, so the physical size of the sensor is a lot smaller and lets in less light. ISO does come with drawbacks, however. Take a microphone as an example. The microphone inputs audio waves, just like a camera gathers light waves. Each convert the inputs into electrical signals, an output in the case of a microphone, a sound file, and an image for a camera. If you recorded a sound file that is really low, such as a whisper or someone speaking really low, you'll pick up a lot of the background hiss. We'll need to increase the amplitude of the recording, but along with the sound you'll also increase the hiss and the background noise. The same is true in the camera. Increasing the sensitivity, or the ISO, increases everything else, from lighting artifacts to electrical grain. And this is known as noise. This also affects dynamic range and color accuracy in the image. So it's always a good rule to do the smallest ISO that you can to get the best image. Note that to have a small ISO value means having more external ambient light to expose the scene, whether you're outside or you have more lamps and overhead lighting in an indoor scene. Larger DSLR mirrorless cameras have a known bias or ISO level for the sensors. So this means having the same ISO setting for different cameras will not produce the same image across them. Lower ISO values are suited for outside daylight videos where there's plenty of ambient light, and also this can be used as faster shutter speeds in small apertures. Mid-range ISOs can be used indoor as long as there's enough lighting to light the scene, such as lamps, external lighting, etc. like that. If your subject's not moving in an indoor light scene, you can actually lower your shutter speed slightly, which means that the sensor will get more light. High range ISO you'll use in a dark lit room, and outside night photography needs higher ISO values. This is where you'll need to experiment to see how far you can push your ISO value without degrading the image or the video footage.